Today, we're living in a world overflowing with information. Every day, millions of voices shout different versions of the truth, and we're left wondering what to believe. There are so many theories that at first glance sound convincing. Creationism, flat earth, lost civilizations like Atlantis, secret societies like the Illuminati. Each has its followers, its scriptures, its sense of purpose. And because the world feels chaotic and confusing, we latch onto the story that feels right, or at least feels comforting. We find people who agree with us, form digital tribes, and then attack those who don't. It's not just about facts anymore, it's about belonging. What's fascinating is that, whether people realize it or not, nearly every one of these modern theories can be traced back to the stories of the Bible. Creationism obviously starts there, but even the flat earth movement borrows imagery from early biblical cosmology. The search for Atlantis echoes the idea of lost Edens, a paradise destroyed by human pride. And even the Illuminati narrative borrows from biblical themes of fallen angels and hidden powers ruling from the shadows. Even atheists, who reject religion altogether, often build their worldview around that very rejection. It becomes the lens through which they interpret everything else, a kind of inverse faith. In that sense, both the devout believer and the devout skeptic are orbiting the same ancient stories. They're just interpreting them differently. It's almost as if conspiracy theories have become modern mystery cults. Instead of gathering in temples, followers gather in online forums and social media circles. Instead of sacred texts, they study documentaries, podcasts, and encrypted leaks. And just like the ancient mystery religions, they see themselves as the initiated few, those who can see the truth, while the rest of the world remains blind. This is why most conspiracy theories draw on ancient myths for evidence. They reference the stories of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and the Bible itself. Because myths carry weight, they feel timeless. But when you dive deep into those ancient stories, you realize they don't actually support the modern theories being built on top of them. Ancient myths weren't meant to be literal history. They were written in a language of symbolism, a kind of spiritual poetry that used gods, heroes, and creation stories to explore deep truths about the human condition. This symbolic language worked on multiple levels. On the surface, you had stories about gods and battles and miracles. But underneath, you had philosophical and psychological teachings, roadmaps for inner transformation. These stories helped people understand life, death, nature, and the divine long before science or psychology existed. They spoke in metaphor because metaphor was the only way to express the inexpressible. In other words, these weren't history lessons. They were mirrors, helping people understand themselves. Before monotheism took hold, nearly every culture on Earth was polytheistic. They worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each representing aspects of nature and consciousness. At the highest level of those pantheons stood two great forces: the invisible creator god, the mind, the spirit, the unseen source, and the visible creation goddess, the body, the earth, the matter from which life emerges. From the mother of creation came all other gods and goddesses, each representing natural laws, emotions, and elements of existence. Over time, as cultures evolved, these symbolic deities were simplified. The pantheon became one god, and nature, the mother, was turned into something secondary. But even today, that duality remains embedded in our culture. We speak of God and Mother Nature, the invisible creator and the visible creation, still intertwined, even if we've forgotten their origin. When the Roman Empire transitioned from polytheism to monotheism, it wasn't just a change of gods, it was a change of thinking. The early followers of Jesus saw his story as symbolic, much like the ancient mystery schools saw their myths, a journey of death and rebirth, transformation and union with the divine. But as Rome institutionalized Christianity, those symbolic teachings became literalized. The mysteries were outlawed. The Gnostics, who sought personal spiritual knowledge through direct experience, were labeled heretics and destroyed. From that moment on, religion became about belief instead of understanding. The outer story replaced the inner meaning. And while this helped unify empires, it also froze the evolution of spiritual thought. Yet, the esoteric interpretations, the symbolic mystical ones, never truly disappeared. They survived quietly, hidden in art, in literature, in philosophy. And when you return to them today, the Bible and other myths begin to make sense again, not as outdated tales, but as spiritual roadmaps for inner growth. The journey of Moses and Joshua into the Promised Land becomes a metaphor for liberation from ignorance. The salvation offered by Jesus becomes the awakening of consciousness. These stories echo the same truths once taught in ancient temples, that enlightenment isn't found outside of us, but within us. When we interpret the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah symbolically, they stop being battlegrounds for dogma and become bridges for understanding. Today, our culture is split between two extremes. On one side, we have religious fundamentalists who take every word literally. On the other, atheists who reject the stories entirely. But what if both sides are missing the point? What if the power of these ancient texts isn't in their surface-level stories, but in the symbolic wisdom hidden beneath them? When believers and skeptics meet in the middle, when we treat these myths as the layered symbolic works of art they were, we find common ground. We realize the goal was never to choose between science and faith, myth and fact, but to integrate them. Because when we replace myth with blind belief, we lose wisdom. And when we reject myth altogether, we lose meaning. But when we read these stories as they were meant to be read, as symbolic blueprints for transformation, we rediscover what they were always trying to teach us. That truth isn't something you inherit, it's something you awaken to.